Well, hi there. These captivating animals are moon jellies. This is an adult moon jelly. And so is this. And these make these. And these make these. Because moon jellies have one of the strangest and most amazing life cycles of any animal. It's so crazy. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Because they're also so beautiful, so enchanting, mesmerizing, like a lava lamp, but way more work. You've probably noticed that they're round. Having a circular body results in something called radial symmetry. This is the first radially symmetrical organism that we have covered on this channel. All of the animals that we've covered to this point have been bilaterally symmetrical. This means that you could only cut them down the center at one place to produce two mirrored halves. This isn't the case with the moon jelly. It can be cut many ways to produce two mirrored halves as long as that cut passes through the center point of the bell. Though I only count 4 ways that you can cut them where the 4 gonads will still be mirrored. So I would call this quadraradial symmetry. I don't know if that is a thing, but echinoderms like starfish have 5-way symmetry through the center, and that is called pentaradial symmetry, so I think it works. In addition to their circular bell and 4 gonads, the moon jelly has a large number of relatively short, thick tentacles that trail down beneath the bell. These tentacles are covered with stinging cells called cnidocytes. This is the attribute that distinguishes this group of organisms, the cnidarians, from any other living thing on the planet. It is the cnidocytes that give the cnidarians, the corals, anemones, hydras, and jellyfish, their name. And that's stinking rad. But is the moon jellyfish, the lava lamp of animals, a good pet? And is the moon jellyfish the best pet cnidarian for you? To figure this out, we've traveled to the incredible Loveland Living Planet Aquarium in Draper, Utah, to score the moon jellyfish based on our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. When it comes to handleability, we give the moon jellyfish a score of 2 out of 5. This may seem high for a fragile marine creature with a venomous sting. I mean, I saw Finding Nemo. I know what these things can do. But the reality is that they aren't difficult to handle. They do have a venomous sting, but, and I'm only speaking about moon jellyfish, some cnidarian stings can make you dead, but with moon jellyfish, the sting is not serious at all. And as you know from Finding Nemo, they only sting with the tentacles, so to avoid the sting completely, they can be handled by the bell. They're also very easy to capture as they're pretty much like a plastic bag in the current to catch. The only problem with handling them, other than the risk of a very minor sting, is that the jellyfish will be damaged. These guys are almost entirely composed of water. They're very delicate. Obviously, they don't do well on land for extended periods of time. Your hands may introduce chemicals and pathogens to their water, and air bubbles in their bells, which can occur easily when they're removed from the water, can be a problem if not removed quickly. The real take-home is that they're easy to manipulate when you need to clean their enclosure or do water changes, but otherwise, you shouldn't handle them. If you want the feeling of handling a moon jellyfish without endangering your moon jellyfish, you just put a little bit of hair gel in a thin, wet plastic bag and have a great time. To simulate the stings, just put a bit of alcohol on your dry skin and enjoy. When it comes to care, we give the moon jelly a score of 2 out of 5. I'm going to start by saying that this is not a totally unreasonable amount of care. There is a reason that the Loveland Living Planet Aquarium produces and keeps so many of them for so many purposes. But this is a very high maintenance lava lamp. For starters, you're going to need to understand how to keep a saltwater aquarium. For details on what this entails, please check out our video on cuttlefish, which are super intelligent, interactive little sea aliens. Rather unlike moon jellies, which don't even have a brain. But long story short, saltwater is a big commitment and requires some expertise and a considerable amount of equipment. Jellyfish tend to be somewhat tolerant to higher levels of nitrogenous waste, which we outline in great detail in our video on freshwater stingrays. but they're otherwise not very tolerant to issues with water pH, temperature, salinity, and general quality. So have this down before you get into jellyfish. The aquarium should generally be cylindrical so that they don't end up trapped in the corners, and the current should move in a circle. Make sure that you have good filtration. A sump seems like a good idea since you shouldn't keep live rock or gravel in the portion of the aquarium that is occupied by the jellyfish. And make sure you get the speed of that current just right for the jellyfish that you have and the size that it is, or they can have all sorts of problems. Perform water changes frequently and with great care to ensure that the new water introduced does not cause any dramatic changes in the water parameters of the enclosure. There are prepared diets, but live feeders like brine shrimp seem to be the safest for your water quality and thus lead to the best outcomes for your jellyfish, which can last multiple years with proper husbandry. That said, moon jellies only live a few months in the wild. They are not a long-lived pet, but they are fairly easy to culture. But now to get a little bit deeper into what it is like caring for moon jellies and how to propagate these incredible, weird little creatures, we have Elsa from the Loveland Living Planet Aquarium, who is their jellyfish keeper. Elsa, thank you so much for being here. It's been so cool learning all about these jellyfish from you today and seeing so many cool things. And these are obviously really neat animals. When somebody gets into keeping a jellyfish, I mean, what are we talking about?
There are a lot of steps that you should know about before you get into keeping a jellyfish. You want to make sure first that you're very comfortable with saltwater aquariums in general. You need to know how their water quality works, basically the type of water chemistry that you're looking for. You should learn about salinity, mixing your own salt water if that's how crazy you want to get with it. Specifically for jellyfish, though, you'll want to make sure that you can find the specific type of tank that they thrive in, which is called a chrysal, or a circular type tank that has a circular flow in it. And you can get these as your own, as kind of like a hobbyist tank. You just want to make sure that you have the right one and that you can really dial in that flow for these animals.
And you were telling me that the exact flow can vary maybe depending on the size of the jellyfish and the size of your enclosure. And what are some of the consequences if it's wrong?
So jellyfish are really sensitive to their flow rate. It's probably the most difficult part of keeping a jellyfish is you really need to make sure that that flow is properly dialed in. So for different size jellyfish, obviously for very small jellies, even the Ephira, you're going to want to have a super slow flow rate. You want those Ephira to circle the tank very, very slowly. As they get bigger, you're going to have to learn how to dial it in so that they can slowly speed up for their size. Obviously, as they eat, it will weigh them down. They might need to have their flow adjusted for that as well. So that's just something that you need to keep your eye on, but it can have negative consequences. If your flow is too high, your jellies will grow up never needing to pulse. If they're not pulsing, they basically just kind of dome over and form a balled up jellyfish that doesn't pulse. It basically just free flows throughout your tank, which is a very unsustainable way to have a jellyfish. But if you have too low flow, it can cause them to evert and basically their bell will just kind of go upwards. So it's really that trick of trying to dial it in so that they get that perfect dome where they need to pulse, but they're not pulsing too hard.
That makes a lot of sense. And you were telling me that metals in the water can be a very big deal, as they are for a lot of invertebrates. And we already talked about salinity. What are other things that you need to have really dialed in addition to flow and these things before you would even be ready to put a jellyfish in your tank?
Yeah. Salinity is a really, really big one. They're very sensitive to a change in your salinity. So you just want to make sure that if you have a jellyfish tank that you can keep it at the same salinity, which means testing it every day, doing top-offs if needed. They are also very sensitive to ammonia in the water. So you want to keep an eye on maybe all of that decaying food that lands on the bottom of the tank. They are very messy eaters. I probably have to clean all of the jellyfish tanks here at least twice a day just to get rid of all that nasty food that they release. And they also can be very sensitive to temperature changes. So if you have an at-home jellyfish tank, you want to make sure that you can keep it at that stable temperature without any degree differences for basically their whole life cycle. If you are going to change it, make sure it's changed very slowly over a long period of time.
And you were telling me you feed them multiple times a day. Was it 3 times a day that you're feeding?
Yeah, so it kind of varies depending on the species and how well they're eating, but for our moons, they tend to eat and digest their food fast enough that they can get fed about 2 to 3 times a day. I monitor their stomachs and see kind of how full they are and then determine from there what else they might still need. But as a jellyfish aquarist, I'm always looking for those bright orange stomachs in their bells. I want to basically see that all day long.
That's so crazy. We got to see everything, actually, about the culturing of these guys. It's so cool. Will you talk me through, like, if a person wanted not only to just keep the Medusa form, but if they wanted to be culturing their own jellies, what is that like?
Yeah, so to culture your own jellies, you're looking at, you need to acquire your own jellyfish polyps, pretty much, for whatever species that you want to do. For moon jellies, they would probably be your easiest ones to culture, but the polyps will really stick and settle to anything. So you can get them to settle on some petri dishes that are hanging suspended in a tank, or like a Pyrex bowl is perfect. If you put the bowl upside down, the polyps, they really need to hang upside down. It's just part of their life cycle. It's how they settle when they're in the ocean as well. The polyps do require their own care as well as their own little carrying tank, whatever you want to put them in. And you do need to be feeding them probably 2 to 3 times a day as well. And they can eat the same foods as adult Medusa jellyfish, but we just need to make sure that we incorporate a lot more rotifers and really small living organisms that they can eat with their tiny little mouths. The polyps themselves, they do require cleaning. You should be cleaning their petri dishes or their bowls about once a week. Just go in with a really tiny paintbrush and spend like a good hour by yourself, maybe listen to some music and scrub them down. That way you can keep your polyps healthy. They can live for about 25 years and still produce jellyfish.
Wow.
If you are taking good care of them.
That's incredible. Okay, so that's how you keep your polyps alive. How do you get them to produce ephyra?
Yeah. So if you want your polyps to actually produce the ephyra, there are 2 things that you can do to your water quality to kind of stimulate that strobulation. So you can either give them an iodine bath. So we just add a few drops of what's called a Lugol's solution, which is basically just liquid iodine to their water, and we let them sit in it. And that just kind of helps them realize that it's time to strobulate. So they will only strobulate if the water condition is perfect, because they do not want to release any jellyfish if the water does not seem to be very good. Mm-hmm. So they usually wait until the water temperature has increased, usually only about like 2 degrees, and then they wait for that iodine spike that normally in the ocean would come with that warming water, and that's how they know that it's time. So there are things you can do at home to kind of stimulate it. Sometimes even just cleaning causes them to start strobulating, as they kind of fear that maybe their life is coming to an end when that paintbrush touches them.
Okay, so some of it could be they detect that conditions are getting bad for them as polyps, and so they're reproducing asexually the only way that they can, so their genes can survive even if they don't.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's super cool. Okay, and so once you have the ephyra, how do you raise them up into adult medusae?
Once you have the ephyra, so usually you can just collect them straight out of your polyp dishes, or you can set up kind of the fun little contraption that we have here where it collects them for us. Your ephyra, you just move it. You'll want to move it into a small chrysal for themselves. So anywhere between 5 to 15 gallons will be good for about a good portion of ephyra, and you can crowd them in there. So you could really load up a chrysal full of them. And again, it goes back to flow rates and feeding. You want to make sure that you have that flow really well for them because they're kind of in this critical stage where they're developing their bells. If the flow is too high, their bells won't develop correctly. If it's too low, you're just going to have a bunch of ephira that starts everting really, really early on in their life. So you'll get them into that chrysal and you'll just feed them, same thing, 2 to 3 times a day. You're just constantly kind of babying them. And it takes about 3 to 4 weeks before you see like any real bell development. And once that happens, you kind of just watch them and move them up to larger tanks as needed until they get to that big dinner plate size, which normally in at-home aquariums, you probably won't have a chrysal that can handle the big full moon jelly, but a lot of people move them up probably through 2 or 3 different tanks before they can put them in their regular desk chrysal.
That is, so it sounds like if you're gonna culture your own, you need multiple tanks, multiple chrysals. It's pretty intense. This is pretty intense. But you produce a lot of them.
Yes.
Like how many do you produce each year, do you think?
We probably are producing thousands of ephira. I've never counted. I don't really ever intend on doing that, but at the rate that they strobulate, and in the summer they tend to strobulate a little bit more when our tanks heat up by just that 1 or 2 degrees that they need. This summer I've probably had thousands of them.
And you don't just use them for display, though that's a major thing. It seems like they're also an important source of feeders.
Yeah.
If you need feeder jellyfish, this is the feeder jellyfish. What all do you use moon jellies for here?
So besides the display animals, the good thing is that while the polyps are releasing so many ephira, usually when an animal is releasing just so many babies that you're not always going to get those ones that turn out perfectly. Usually it's kind of just like you get a few that will grow up and be the beautiful moons, and then a few of them are going to turn out kind of distorted, a little mutated, maybe with really long oral arms or no tentacles or super domed. And it happens in every breed, every little batch of ephira that we get. So those ones we just kind of set off to the side, and there are feeder jellies. So we can pull them out when the time is ready, and then we actually will crush them up and feed them out to our Pacific sea nettles as well as our bay nettles. It's a really vital part of their diet. So even the moon jellies that aren't maybe going to use on exhibit are still getting used in a really good way. That's
really, really cool. Well, did you have anything else that you think somebody who's considering getting into moon jellies needs to know about moon jellies?
I would say if you're going to get into moon jellies, definitely spend your time doing your research. Just make sure you know what you're getting into. Even someone like me who takes care of moon jellies in an aquarium setting with some of these larger tanks and a lot of propagation, I don't know if I would feel comfortable having my own moon jelly tank at home. They are a lot of work, but I think if you are willing to put in the work, the cleaning, and making sure that they really have all the good food and the supplementing that they need, you could have a really cool moon jelly tank.
That's awesome. Well, that sounds pretty intense, but thank you for letting us know what it would be involved if that was what we really wanted to do. And thank you for providing a place that we can go see these animals, since I probably don't want to keep them myself.
You are so welcome.
Thank you so much, Elsa. When it comes to hardiness, we give the moon jelly a score of 3 out of 5. Under the best of circumstances, an individual medusa, the free-swimming form, is not super long-lived. They do often live longer in captivity than they do in the wild. You might get a few years out of one medusa. And if you know how to culture them yourself, you may have essentially a lifetime supply of them. Since they don't have a brain or a face, you probably don't get much more attached to any one individual than you do to a houseplant or a pair of shoes. But they are alive and can be killed. They're tolerant of relatively high levels of nitrogenous waste, but are not so tolerant to any of the other fluctuations of water quality and temperature. Be careful when doing water changes, that the temperature and salinity of the water added to the tank matches that of the water removed. Carefully monitor pH, and in general, just be a really diligent saltwater aquarium keeper. Also, watch out for bubbles in the bell. This is a common and avoidable problem if you're careful. Also, make sure you have adequate water flow to prevent the tentacles from forming balls or all sorts of other malformation of the bell and just your jellyfish in general. Acclimate them slowly to the tank when you first introduce them, and be careful not to damage the bell through rough handling or by exposing them to excessively acidic foods. When it comes to availability, we give the moon jelly a score of 3 out of 5, which surprises me since I've never seen moon jellies at a pet shop or an expo. I really didn't realize that they're so easy to get. I bet there are pet shops and expos that have them, but if you really want one, they're actually surprisingly easy to get online. The reason is probably simply that not too many people work with them, but those that do produce a lot of them. So if you want a moon jelly, the fact is that you could have one to your door by this time tomorrow. Just make sure you have the tank all figured out first. When it comes to upfront costs, we give the moon jelly a score of 2 out of 5. Moon jellies are actually remarkably inexpensive. We're talking corn snake money. But the enclosure is going to be where you spend your money. Saltwater aquariums are not inexpensive, but the saltwater aquarium that you need for a moon jelly is actually not insanely expensive for a saltwater aquarium. There are many companies that sell complete packages that include all of the testing supplies and other materials that you will need to set up your aquarium, as well as the aquarium itself designed for jellyfish for not wholly unreasonable prices. Though something like this amazing aquarium at the Loveland Living Planet Aquarium will cost a fair amount. And I want to take just a moment to say thank you to the Loveland Living Planet Aquarium for allowing us to be here today. If you're ever in Utah, perhaps to come to Clint's Reptile Room, I strongly encourage you to plan time to come here to the Loveland Living Planet Aquarium. You've probably noticed that I love zoos and aquariums. I love them. And this place is one of the best that I have visited anywhere in the world. And this is why we give the moon jelly an overall score of 2.4 out of 5. Moon jellies are undoubtedly cool. They are a hypnotically mesmerizing pet that you can watch for hours. But in a lot of ways, they're basically an expensive, high-maintenance lava lamp. Heck, they even make lamps with fake jellyfish in them. And for most people, that is probably a vastly superior pet jellyfish. But if what you want is truly a living jellyfish, and you're willing to spend the money and put in the work, then the moon jelly might be the best pet cnidarian for you. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. If you want the feeling of handling a moon jellyfish without endangering your moon jellyfish, you just put a little bit of hair gel in a thin, wet plastic bag and have a great time.
What's up?
Would it be possible to let Jason back in?
No.
Oh, yeah. He had a good run.